The future has arrived. As the world and humanity itself moves faster and faster into unimaginable possibilities, old institutions that built connection and shaped our sense of meaning are falling by the wayside. In their wake, profound questions about ethics, our purpose, and spirituality demand new answers. Join your host, Scott Mason, in Season 2 of the Purpose Highway podcast. We will explore how these social changes will revolutionize our society. We will learn how they impact our own search for connection and meaning. And we will hear stories of influencers whose lives have had radical change from the inside and found profound connection to others and themselves through a new definition of meaning. The future has arrived. Are you ready?
When you're racing down the Purpose Highway, we want to make sure you're healthy and happy every step of the way. That's why we're proud to partner with It's NOLA, 21st century plant-based healthy granola snack bites made with real ingredients and audacious flavor. It's NOLA crafts small batch hand-rolled granola balls that are vegan, gluten-free, and naturally low in sugar. It's NOLA's delightful bites come in 3 flavors: luscious cranberry coconut, sassy mango masala, and dark, decadent, chewy chocolate. It's NOLA is available to both individual customers and for wholesale accounts at itsnola.com. That's ITSNOLA.com. Guests on this show are already enjoying this delicious snack. Check out It's NOLA's website for yourself and find out how good it is. Hello, everybody. It's Scott Mason, revving up for another race down the Purpose Highway. And sitting next to me today in the front seat is Kashaun Parker. Kashaun is an inspirational speaker and a certified transition coach. She helps widows that are struggling with their sense of identity now that they're widowed build a new life. Kashaun, welcome to the show.
Thank you
How
for
are you
having
today?
me, Scott. Real good. It's a pleasure to be on today.
It is. We're very happy to have you. Kashaun, before we get into the questions, I would like to just remind you and anyone watching or listening to the show for the first time about some of the central points or the reasons why this particular season of the show exists. It is my contention that we are living in the middle of a secret plague. This episode is being recorded in January of 2022, which is in the midst of a certain public health crisis that's been dragging on for 2 years. But that isn't the secret plague that I'm talking about. The secret plague is alienation that people feel from each other, and it's been measured across a whole number of different cultural realms and started well before the current health crisis began. My concern is that it's actually going to get a lot worse before it gets better. Related to that is the decline of the historical institutions that have connected people for eons with each other to alleviate the secret plague before it even starts, as well as help them find meaning together. The decline of these institutions across the world is what I call the silent revolution. And part of the reason I strongly wanted to have you on this episode was because with regards to the silent revolution, this season we're talking over and over and over again about people who are helping find new pathways to connect with a sense of spirituality, purpose, and ethics in a world where the major religious institutions are no longer as dominant as they once were. Kashaun, these subjects independently and together connect to your work. Let's talk a little bit, at first at least, about the secret plague. You principally work with widows, and in your description, you talk about helping them recover a sense of identity. In a world where isolation and a sense of separation are already risk factors for everyone, do you believe that widows in particular are at risk of this as opposed to, let's say, widowers or children that lose their parents? Why did you choose to work with widows, and why does helping them recover a sense of identity speak to you?
Yeah, that's a really good question. So for me, working with widows was a no-brainer because it's one that touches me personally. I've been a widow now for coming up on 6 years. And so I personally know the journey. I remember, from the loss and then the grieving period and the moments that I was left really wondering, okay, well, what now? Who am I? I'm not a married woman anymore. So, even the crowds, right? You think about everybody that, you and your spouse kind of mingle with, and those groups, they kind of fade away after some time, and you're really left just kind of trying to figure it out. And while it's a scary time, it's also an empowering time, because as you get more in tune with you learn some things. You learn about, who you are as a result of what you've gone through. And I've worked with quite a few widows up until this point. And the story is pretty consistent. When they sit down, they're left sitting, trying to figure out, okay, I've got to now find new friends, a new sense of belonging, a new sense of being, because everything that they had was tied into their marriage. And in some cases, it was even down to the work that they did. They were stay-at-home moms. Like, they didn't have to go into a traditional career. Well, now, because they're no longer married, they have to now figure out, okay, now does this mean I've got to get a job, or what is that? What now? And so you really have to define, who do you want to be? What do you want this to represent? And is it something that you want to just become an added label for you, or are you really just looking to break free and do something more with yourself, as you uncover just the strength, the resiliency, the determination that you have to just kind of rise above the challenge?
Kashaun, I'll be honest. I was expecting that answer to be very pithy and to allow me to quite quickly move into a discussion about the silent revolution. But you threw me for a loop, and in a good way.
Okay.
Because although you're not excessively verbose, within the words that you said, there actually was a lot that I want to dive into just with regards to the secret plague.
Okay.
So let's begin to roll up our sleeves and talk about that a little bit.
Okay.
First of all, on the theme of connection, separation, identity, and alienation. Let me ask you this. About how old are you?
40.
So you're not someone, you're not to put anyone on the spot or anything, but it's not like you're 87 and your 89-year-old husband passed away.
Absolutely.
Which is tragic and sad. And I'm sure there are widows that are dealing with extreme issues. In fact, we're going to talk about one widow that I know that has dealt with this as this conversation goes on, who's in that age bracket. But you're talking about situations in which a female has lost someone in the prime of her life. And that's important. Now, stepping into that, those years, as I understand it, and people can disagree, are your prime socialization years when it comes to being engaged in, like you mentioned earlier, the workplace or in community activities or activities with your children if you have them, school stuff, a whole host of things that keep people in this day and age very, very busy and very connected. That I understand how it would be disruptive. But you also mentioned in passing the people that you socialize with, the people who you hang with, they disappear. That actually threw me for a loop. Could you talk to me a little bit further about what's going on with that, how that happens, why that happens?
Yeah, so it's not all of a sudden, and I think that's what's really unique about it. Like, so you have the tragic event, the loss happens, and then you enter into the phase of grieving, and so the support system usually in that time, and for me especially, is really strong. You have a nice outreach, you have support, phone calls, all of that, but then fast forward, say a year. Because that's when I really noticed it. The phone calls start to decrease. You're no longer getting invited out to do special events or special outings. You'll hear about them, especially now in the age of social media, right? Everything is posted, and it's like, oh, wow, I would have loved to have been a part of that. But you never get the invitation. And then, now you continue to fast forward. So now you're 3 years in. And essentially there is no more check-ins really, other than just, hey, how you been, but that deep found sense of connection that you once shared while you were married and in that relationship is no more. And those connections, I think, are the ones that stuck with me the most, because I go from being able to call somebody up on a Saturday night, hey, let's go out, let's go hang out, as a couple. And then now it's like, okay, I don't really identify or resonate with the single crowd, even though quite technically I'm single, right? But I no longer fit into this married crowd who I've grown. And for me, it was something to the tune of 15 years of engaging and being involved in this network. Well, you don't really fit in there because you're no longer married. And it's like, okay, well, what do I do? Now I got to go out and I got to make this new group of friends. I've got to now re-engage. And so you're immediately just kind of funneled into where, okay, you want to find like-minded people. So you start talking with fellow widowers, folks that understand and they get, where your mindset is and the things that, are happening in your world as of now. Whereas the other groups, they will listen, but the resonance isn't there because they don't really understand, I have this and now it's no more. I'm sorry that you have to go through that, which is a little different, right? And it's not in a callous way. It's not, derogatory or anything like that. It's just kind of how we do. And so it just kind of really forces you to find a new crowd, so to speak. It's just one of the things that happens.
One of the reactions inside that I'm having is a deeper sense of questioning about all of our relationships. Speaking personally here, as a gay man who has been married for going on 24 years, I can't even imagine losing my husband, particularly at this phase in my life. And so that there is a fearfulness that this conversation can bring out in me because it's forcing me, by talking to you, to face the unimaginable. But one other thing that I didn't expect entering into this conversation was an examination of friendships. Before I met David, my husband, I had a lot of friends who were like me, single, or who didn't have children and had marriages where they had the flexibility to just go out and hang out with their single friends. And I did notice that with a very, very few exceptions, as the friends that I had children, their lives seemed to move away. And not only that, but I did find myself hanging out more and more, really not consciously, with other people who were in long-term relationships. And I never really thought about the single people that I might have left behind as I engaged more and more with my coupled friends. But I do remember feeling kind of betrayed and left behind by the people who had children and whose lives were suddenly wrapped up with their kids' friends groups that I was never going to be part of because I consciously, along with my husband, made a choice not to have children. And one of the things that you're saying is, and presenting, is that cycle happening again. I'm curious as to then what you think that this means as to the very nature of human connection. When I'm a friend with somebody, I always tell people, when you're friends with me, you're friends for life. And there have been friends that I have thought, I will be friends with you forever. But what you're doing is making me question, really, whether I can count on any friend. Am I hearing you correctly? And do you have thoughts about this?
Well, so I would say there are certain friendships that, you have, and those friendships, I don't consider those friends. I consider those non-blood family, right? And those are your closer knit, the more intimate connections that you have. And those stick around. But you also, if you evaluate your circles, there's this group of connections that you have where you could call up and like you said, maybe go to dinner or something like that as couples. And what happens in this space, if you get to the unfortunate event of being a widower, that group of friends now, you yourself may feel, I don't really identify with that, because here's what's happening. You're battling your own emotion. So you're watching and you're evaluating and you're remembering and you're feeling and you're just, it puts you in a sunken place that says, geez, it hurts to be in this circle now. Because I had that and I really didn't ask for this. I don't want this, but I don't want that either. And so I don't want to send the impression that they, the circles kind of only migrate. There's kind of this almost repulsive action where you both are kind of going your own separate ways because it's too painful to hold on to. I think I mentioned it more or less because the invitation stopped, where it was just kind of more mutual and everybody's kind of coming together like, hey, what you doing for the weekend? That kind of goes away. But when that goes away and you get invited somewhere. So for me, I was invited out to attend a dinner with a couple that, we had known. And I didn't want to turn it down because I knew that I needed to get out. I knew that it was healthy to do that. Yeah. And so I went and I tried to smile and converse and do all the things that are healthy, in that space. Well, I was miserable. I was absolutely miserable because the one person that I would have loved to have been in that space with was no longer here. And that was the constant reminder. So for me, it was, okay, I don't want this anymore. So what is it that I want to do? I want to find my group. Where are my people now? Because this isn't it. And it doesn't mean that I don't go back to it. It's just for right now, that's not the space that I need to be in.
Yet I would imagine that the group of widowers and widows in any given community, probably even here in New York City, maybe not here as much, but maybe, and I would imagine all the more so if you live in a rural area, isn't exactly massive. Mm-hmm. Is it one of these things where you are in a situation, if you're going to be seeking out people who are similarly situated, where you're grasping for a community that's so small, you might not even really have a community at all?
So the beauty of social media is you get the sense of community and connectedness even though they're not with you. And so what I learned to do is leverage social media. So I would join widow and widower groups, and they would have, between 3 and 10,000 members in the group. And so what you do then is you start to really locally organize. You get in a group and you'll ask, okay, who is from a place that, for me, it would be Chicago. Who's from the Chicago area? So you would find out, and then you would organize, a link up, and everybody kind of come together and talk and, share stories, share space. And that then becomes healing too. Because you don't feel so isolated and alone. And so for me, using the social platforms was really like a leverage out of my hole, out of my pit, to just go and find a new sense of connectedness. I think I joined somewhere between, 8 to 10 groups. And I wanted to really find others like me. I just really did not want to feel like I was in this space alone when everything in me was alone. I didn't want to feel alone. So it was, how can I help me? Well, I can reach out. I can start to advocate for myself and try to, while I'm doing that, see who I could help too. Because what I've learned is through sharing, through connection, you never know what your story may offer someone that's there to their journey for healing. So, I gave a long-winded answer to your question, but it's like really just, reach out. There's groups, especially now that we're in a social connected environment, and just ask the question. And then when you want to link up closer, throw the question out there, who's from, and you'd be amazed at, how many folks are really right where you are in your neighborhood. I had a girl that was 2 subdivisions over, had no idea. And we were both kind of in the same spot, just working our way through, this idea of being a widow.
Do you feel, though, that by rebuilding a community of connection around this particular experience, there's the risk of having relationships that are totally defined by grief? Yes. And that then, how do you avoid that? Just where does that ultimately go? Eventually, we know that we all have to move on from the grief. Probably it's with you forever. I would imagine with me, it would never, ever go away if I were, God forbid, to lose David. But I still, and he wouldn't want that either, for that to define my entire future. How do you avoid that sort of thing happening?
So when you say that sort of thing, you're referring to just kind of the trauma connection.
Or the trauma connection being the only connection, and building a circle of friends where that's really just, it's not just a catalyst for you connecting, but that being the only connection that you have. So you're not able to really build a community beyond that, or you're not able to expand the relationship to become multi-dimensional. Okay.
So, and I think that's really what drove me into the space of identity. Mm-hmm. Because you're dealing with multiple facets. You're in this space and you're isolated. You at least that's how you feel. Yeah. And so then you reach out to these groups that, you feel a sense of connectedness with them. They get you, you get them, and you have that. But once you start really identifying you and understanding the things that you really like, you follow the same cadence. You go out and you look for things that feed and nurture you, yourself, your own being. And there's a community in everything, right? If you like pottery, there are all kinds of organizations out there to do pottery. I mean, you name it, there's something there where you can go and connect and really now bring in, this new group of community. And this time it's not really based on, well, my husband and I, or my wife and I, we had this couple that, we just all hang out with. It becomes a bit more than that, where I can hang out here with my husband or my wife, but I can also hang out here and it's just for me. And both are fulfilling. I think that for me was the greatest lesson. I had identified myself solely as a wife. So when I lost that sense of being a wife, I really just didn't know what to do.
Yeah.
And that's what started the sense of soul searching and identification for Kashaun. What does Kashaun like? And I sat with that for quite some time because I didn't want it to be influenced by anything or anyone else, where if I'm in this position again, I'm at rock bottom and I really can't see my way up and out.
And that goes as to an unexpected message that I'm hearing that goes as to people who cannot face the possibility of becoming a widow or a widower. But this is almost like a life lesson, which is that solely identifying with your spousal status is a dangerous thing to have happen. Now, the more common situation in which that might be exposed is if one of the spouses has an affair and then there's a divorce. But in your situation, you're dealing with that lack of having developed a core sense of what's unique to you apart from your spouse. At the same time as that spouse, at least with a divorce, there's always, even if it's not likely, a possibility of a reconciliation. Person's dead, they ain't coming back. They're gone.
Yeah.
Do you feel like this problem is worse for women than men? Or why are you focusing on widows as opposed to widowers? And what might you say to someone who is a widower, or not a widower, but who's a male, who may be listening to this? Okay, so this is why I ask. I'm a male in an LGBTQ relationship, so I'm obviously not going to be a widow. However, I think I speak for a lot of men who are like, my husband makes my food. He is there to comfort me. He's there to make sure I look, that I clip my nose hairs when I go on this podcast so I don't look all crazy and funky. He's there to put up with my temper tantrums. He's there to say, Scott, chill out. He's there to organize my life. Heaven forbid I be left. He's there to tell me, please get rid of that shirt now. I wouldn't even know how to function. And I suspect a lot of men are that way. They may identify independently as the breadwinner of the house, and they may not say their identity might not be as the husband. I have to say I've never met a man that's his identity as the husband. So I understand the differentiation there. But there is, in many men, a dependency on women that cries out for help. So why do you feel that widows in particular need a specific support of the sort that you offer? And I'm not saying one is better or worse. This is a curious question.
So for me, I work with anyone, okay, but my primary group happens to be widows. Maybe that's the case because I am a widow, I'm a woman, and that resonance is there, and that's why that larger group kind of taps in. But I have had the same discussion with widowers. The conversation is the same. As you just said, I use my spouse to check my tie or my nose hairs or whatever it is. When that is missing, you know it.
Yeah.
And so you then... you start to ask yourself the same questions. They're not gender-based. Who am I? Now that this is the case for me, what do I like? What do I enjoy doing? Can I learn to check myself? Do I need to go get a mirror where I can go in and look for myself and say, yeah, I look damn good today. This is the way we're going to go out and rock the show, right? It becomes with you. And then when you get it again, when it comes around for a second time, the idea is it's extra. You've already added it in for yourself. You're secure enough in you. You understand you. And everything else becomes just more sugar on the cookie, right? It's like it's just more icing on the cake. It is not, though, the thing that if you find yourself again in separation, you're not there trying to climb the same mountain over again. not understanding yourself. You don't feel like you've lost yourself in what you've gone through. That's the idea. That's the purpose. And that doesn't matter, male, female, gay or straight. It does not matter. You kind of just go with it.
Well, there is one manifestation of this, though, I'm curious as to your thoughts on, that might be gender-based.
Sure.
But maybe not. And that is what I have seen as the identification of a woman who loses her spouse as a charity case or an object of pity in a way that I've not known a lot of widowers, I'll be honest, but those that I've known, I've never heard of people referring to or viewing a man, even subconsciously, the same way as a woman. Even terms like an alms for widows. And I know a lot of this relates to historical perceptions around women as dependent on men due to social norms that have been enforced or just cultural assumptions about who and what women are. Talk to me a little bit about whether that is just my fanciful imagination running wild again, or whether that's a real issue, how it plays out, and how people can deal with that, and how they can support a woman who might be in that situation.
So you're in the right ballpark. Yes, there are some cases, situations, and instances where there is a natural sense of sensitivity to a widow. Where you feel the need to just reach out, support, or be of help and service to her. But I would say in some cases for a widower, what you'll find is if there's children involved, you'll get that same kind of nurturing support. Because the storyline typically becomes, my wife handled the kids. And so now I've got to get in there and learn how to interact and intermingle with them where I just really didn't. Or you'll get, with the domestics, the cooking, the cleaning. And so when they reach out, it's like, well, I didn't have to cook. Yeah. My wife handled all that. So, okay, well, now I'm here and I have to cook. Well, I've got to either learn, find someone else to come in and fill that role, or there's takeout. So, but when you mention that, I think the support system and the outreach, there really is a greater calling for the widows than the widowers in that sense. I have to agree with you. I'm not entirely sure why that is. Maybe it's just because, historically males tend to be more self-sufficient and can kind of pick up and maneuver and not stay, I would say, stuck in that space for too long. Whereas widows, we're kind of, we're emotional and in that sense where it takes us a little while to process through and then move forward. You tend to not have many widowers just stay in that area for too long.
In 2019, back in that era, some may have forgotten even exists, when we could do this thing called traveling, free and easy, without worry. I'm from New York City. I went to a convention in Denver, and I had been on vacation with my husband for maybe 10 days or so beforehand. Then we split, and he went directly home, and I went to this convention. And when I was walking through that convention center, as I checked in, it was so big. It looked so glamorous. There were so many people around. And I was going up to that hotel room where I was staying all by myself. And I remember thinking, I'm so lonely without my husband. I don't know how I'm going to make it through this convention. And then I thought, if he were to never come back, I'm so lonely, I could die. Do you think people could die of loneliness?
To a degree. So I've done a little, researching in that area, and I think the term they use is like of a broken heart, where your heart literally is broken from the sense of the loss. And it's in conjunction with the loneliness. It's the adjustment. It's kind of all of these things that are in at once. It's not just, oh, I'm lonely. It's, who am I? What's happening? Because it moves. So you go from a space of today, it's your husband. I mean, I want you to just imagine with me. You're with your husband, everything is good. And then you go to bed tonight. And then you wake up in the morning and you and your husband part ways. Your husband goes to work and you go to work, and then, you get a phone call and there's been a tragic accident and your husband perishes as a result of that accident. Right? Immediately, that starts to shift. Immediately. It's not like, okay, well, now I'm alone. You're alone, you're confused, right? And it's just this whole conglomerate of thoughts and feelings and emotion that begin to spiral as you just really process. And mind you, you haven't even gotten to the details of really what happened. There's not been a funeral. There's not been a burial. You haven't even really begun the grieving process. This is just the incident. And so, when you talk about looking at the loneliness piece, in fairness, to be able to isolate just into loneliness, I think you're somewhere well down the road. You don't even realize it.
Wow.
Until somewhere later where you're just like, man, this sucks. I'm really alone here in this space. And now you're longing and missing and wanting to be, connected with someone on that level again.
Kashaun, we mentioned earlier the 80-something person who loses their spouse.
Yeah.
Do you feel there is a difference in how grief is treated and how widowhood is experienced, depending on the age of the individual or how long the relationship has lasted?
So I think there's a difference, but I think it's just a slight difference.
Okay.
And the difference really is the relationship itself. What I've learned is, it does vary by age. It does vary by length of relationship, but it also varies by the health of the relationship. I've had the fortune of talking with some widows who say, well, what about us? I'm not a widow or widow that was in a space where my husband and I loved each other so much. We were just kind of at it. And then this happened, and now I didn't want him to die, but I'm still left to process, but I don't have all those happy memories. I had another widow that, she's like, well, my husband was abusive when he passed. He was addicted to alcohol, and he would come in and just be really abusive. And so she's like, I don't have any of those memories, but that doesn't make this hurt any less. That doesn't make this journey any less. It just, if anything, the idea of age and the idea of how long you've been together, it just kind of puts everything into perspective. And have you just really evaluate from your perspective, because my situation, my perspective is going to be different than yours, than anyone else's, and it just really helps you to focus in and not get lost in, somebody else's story at that point.
Well, and I do know, and this was a case of where generation may have mattered. Again, an 80-something-year-old widow whose husband died after, I think, 60, maybe 60 plus years of marriage. And during the last decade of his life, he was medically dependent. He was always a bit controlling, but the medical needs exacerbated that. He was not always patient. And she felt, as she was getting older, like this decade of her life she had no guarantee of much time afterwards was gone. And so there was a sense, I think, guiltily, but real nonetheless, of being relieved. Yes, she grieved, but interestingly, she also seemed to get younger. And she did change. It's almost like she found those things at age 80 something that you talked about earlier, that people who might otherwise lose their spouses, have to discover 40 years before. Do you feel that someone who might be feeling that, are there special situations that they encounter that may require some assistance from you? Like, do they feel guilt about that? Does society judge them for it? If so, and how do we, again, support someone who might be in that situation without saying, oh, good, thank God they're dead, or something like that?
So, yes, there's support. And yes, for me, if they landed in my office, I'd help. Because there's still a level of uncovering that needs to happen. And so what you really get into is now the specifics, the uniqueness. You mentioned, a level of guilt. Guilt is one of the most unique emotions that I tend to deal with, because I've learned it strikes us all in a very, very different way. So, let's just say, and I keep using you, but Lord knows I'm not.
Yeah, that's okay. That's okay. This is a real conversation, so let's keep it real.
You're in this situation, and you decide, okay, I don't want to stay here and grieve. I feel like I've paid my respect to my loss, and I'm just ready to start moving on and rebuilding. And you date again, and maybe it's within 3 months. Well, now you've got your own internal guilt. What I've found is there's also judgment for yourself. There's judgment from the outside, and it's like, oh, I can't believe you're dating already. And so it's like, and then it becomes this battle of, how do I please me, which is really who it's about, whether you're 80 or 20 in this space.
Yeah.
It's how do I, maintain a level of peace for me that allows me to move forward in a way that I can live with. And whatever that is, by all means, do it. Because as long as you go and you're trying to satisfy what someone else is going to say, that's a hard road to travel. You'll get exhausted very quickly. And then you'll find yourself still unfulfilled, still unhappy, because the work hasn't been done to pay homage to you first. And it's not selfish. It's not inconsiderate of others, your spouse, or like it's you, though, that matters. Then you can be a lifeline of support to everybody else.
We've talked a lot about the grief process and widow and widowerhood with regards to the secret plague of alienation. We haven't even gotten to the silent revolution. We're about to transition to that. But before we talk about the silent revolution, I would like you to share your own story, because that will be a really good lead-in to the discussion about spirituality and death and grief. You said you were a widow. You said that you are young still. Talk to us about your story.
Okay. So my story really began February 9th, 2016. And it was a regular day. It was my husband and I, we got up, and we so happened to work together. Mm-hmm. And we went to work and did our normal routine, which is you talk on the car ride to work about everything that you're expecting for the day, and then you you have, for us, it was we would have our lunch and our breaks and just continue to enjoy each other's company.
Yeah.
And then we leave work for that day, and my husband says, I'm just extremely tired. And I said, you look it. And I just remember saying that. And he's like, okay. And so my husband had a routine. He would go to the gym 4 nights out of the week. And then 3 nights off. But he would do his 4 nights kind of consecutively, felt that it kept his momentum going. So this particular day was the last day of the week that he had to go to the gym. And my husband also suffered epilepsy, but it was controlled with medication. So the epilepsy wasn't a concern at this point. Just, from understanding, though, and person with epilepsy, being tired and getting sufficient rest is extremely important. And so when he mentioned that he was tired and me working with him through this process, I just knew that was my own, and I hadn't realized it at the time. This is in hindsight, that I knew, though, that my antennas were up because it's triggering to something. So this day he he kind of goes through, and we have 3 children. We have 2 girls and a boy. And he interacted with all the children, and he says to me, you should come and go with me. And I said, no. I said, I'll take the kids, and you just go ahead and just hurry back so you can get some rest. And so I said, I'll have dinner ready by the time you get home. Again, just kind of a normal interaction with us. He leaves and goes to the gym at about 5 o'clock. And so I'm in our kitchen, and I'm cooking dinner. And this particular day, I remember just looking at the clock like, he should have been home by now. I haven't heard from him. And I just said to myself, I'm like, but I know if I call him, he's going to get agitated and angry and want to know why I'm checking up on him, And so I just kind of let it pass. I finished with dinner. And so now I'm bathing our baby. We had an 18-month baby at the time. She was the youngest. And I'm thinking to myself, man, it's 8:30 and I haven't heard from him. So just as I was picking up my phone to call him, my phone rang and his number comes up, and I'm just getting ready at this point to let him have it because I'm worried sick. And when I answered the call, it wasn't him, it was an officer. And the officer says, ma'am, there's been a terrible accident, and we noticed that there's a baby seat in the car. Can you tell us if there's a baby in the car? And I said, there was no baby. But even that took a while. I mean, I just sat in shock, in silence. And the officer actually had to come back and yell at me. He says, ma'am, was there a baby in the car? Like, really aggressive. And I said, no, she's with me. And he says, well, I need you to get to St. Joe's right away because there's been a terrible accident. And that was all the information he gave me. And at this point, I kind of had to get my older kids, they were 11 at the time, I had to get them to take the little one and help with her to go rush to the hospital. And when I got there, the officers, they told me that my husband had flatlined a couple times and they were having trouble maintaining a steady heartbeat. They didn't know the nature of the car accident, but it was pretty bad. And as I'm working to process this, one of the officers says, well, I can tell you where the accident was. And he says it was right at the intersection of Caden Farm and Red Hawk Drive, which happens to be the intersection of my subdivision. So my husband actually had the car accident. seconds away from our house. He was almost home. And it turns out that he had gone into a full-blown seizure while driving home from the gym. And he never made it home that day. At that point, I mean, just everything started moving at lightning speed. My husband ended up, he stayed in the hospital for a few days. They asked me, well, ma'am, is there anything you'd like us to do? And I, quite naturally said, you do whatever it takes to save him. Mm-hmm. And they did a phenomenal job, but, it's just, it wasn't in the plan. And that was one of the hardest things that, I had to swallow in this whole thing. It's like, sometimes you just gotta yield to something that's greater than you. And that was what I had to learn to do.
Were you part of a faith community?
At that time, no, not religiously. So my husband and I was into spirituality and faith. But my husband, he had his beliefs. And so, I kind of just let him take the lead there. And so as far as joining communities or anything like that, no, we were not. That was something that would come later.
Talk to me a little bit about your own spiritual journey. And then we'll talk a little bit about the silent revolution.
Okay.
Take whatever time you need, by the way. In whatever way.
I'm sorry.
Take whatever time you need and tell
Okay.
it whatever way is right for you.
So, for my husband and I, we would talk spirituality and faith, and he says, well, I'm a believer. But I don't necessarily think that you have to be a part of an organization or a group or anything to be a believer. And he was adamant about that. So for me, I too am a believer. But given the nature of my story and my life, mine just kind of went a little deeper. Mm-hmm. So I was the one that would, lean towards prayer and meditation to kind of understand and figure out where the next steps would lead. And it was, at that time, it was more or less when tragedy struck that would lead me to kind of get still and start the process. And gradually, what I learned was more helpful for me to at least prepare for these moments is to have that system every day on an ongoing basis. Mm-hmm. So I then began to, as part of my outreach and searching for communities, I found a community, a religious community, and I joined that. And I've been a part of it ever since. And it's really something special, when you, again, you believe, and everybody, have their own special belief systems. And I don't try to sway or persuade anyone to believe any certain thing or certain way. But for me, it was, I'm in this support group, and I could feel the love. I could feel the love in a different way than I ever could in any of the communities that I was a part of. And so it was like that spiritual connection that I wanted. I just didn't know that I was worthy of it because it wasn't something that I was practicing. But I had to just really now build that relationship again. For me, it's God, with God to talk with him, right. to fellowship with him, to understand, well, what does this mean? Because I talk about losing my husband, but, I am someone that's gone through a series of just losses and death. And so it's like, I'm at this point where I'm saying, I have nothing else to give. I have nothing else that I could really lose in this realm. help me to make sense of it so that it doesn't overcome me, that I can move forward.
Yeah.
And that's where the spirituality piece just came in and kind of just helped solidify the internal me.
Right.
And strengthen me so that I could not so much get lost in the will of God, because, I believe that everything falls under his divine will.
Mm-hmm.
And learn to accept that no matter what, everything is going to be okay. And that's been the journey.
I really appreciate your candor about that.
Yeah.
As we discussed at the top of the hour, the silent revolution involves changes in thinking, both in the Western world and in other parts of the world, based on the data that an earlier guest presented who studies this for a living. With regards to the relationship of spiritual communities like organized religions with the day-to-day lives, ethics, spirituality, and purpose that individuals are having. And as we also mentioned at the top of the show, people, although, and actually in a way you all are a case in point, it sounds like you weren't part of such a community. So you didn't have the support of that community built in to immediately fall back on. Now, there are a lot of people who, even if who might not be a part of such a community, and they might not even have the strong spiritual sense that is independent of that relationship with a community, that may at least have opened the door to them to think, okay, maybe this is an area where I need to reconnect with other people. And so what advice would you give to someone who is in that situation? They may be an atheist, or they may simply have no sense of spirituality at all. Really, what their life is about is just day to day. They're coming to you, they're hearing how you handle it, but they're saying, well, you believe in something that I don't. What do you offer to those sorts of people? That used to be the area that one of the core areas of jurisdiction, for lack of a better word, of these historical religious institutions is rallying community in the face of death. People, when they talk about why these institutions are in decline, they talk about social reasons, they talk about power. With some institutions, they may talk about belief about social justice, histories of racism or homophobia or suppressing women or child abuse, or just not keeping up with the times and insisting that we go back to 1500 when we're about to, we're almost midway through the 21st century. But those discussions are about the substance of the belief. They're not really about what happens in the face of that one time when people need that community. What do you tell folks facing this?
So one of the core beliefs that has been instilled in me, since before I can remember, is rather than preach a sermon, be a sermon. Mm-hmm. And what that means for me is, before I can tell you what you should believe and who you should believe in, just practice non-judgment and love. Make them curious and really lean into you and the person that you are. And when that opportunity presents itself for the discussion of what do you believe, then you share. But you don't share in such a way that's condemning, that's confronting, or that just makes someone feel like where their choices are is the wrong choice, because there's no right and wrong. Mm-hmm. I do what works best for me. If there's an atheist or a non-believer out there, that's for them. But if they come into a space with me, and I've had some non-believers, I've had discussions, I'm not here to tell you what to believe. Mm-hmm. I'm here to hear your story. Mm-hmm. And if us talking and sharing our stories, lends way to what my beliefs are and you want to know more, then I'll share. But even in the sharing space, it is really from a sense of just that. I am not to persuade you. I am not to convince you. You will make that choice for yourself. You will decide what works best for you. And you just leave it out there. You leave it for where it's at. I think that's, I think that's part of the problem that we do have is, some of us that are believers, we feel it's our mission, our duty to try to convert and try to change or persuade someone. And it's really not. Our job is to love. That's our sole purpose, is to love. Offer that. And then, just see where it goes. But if I judge you, how much better am I in my seat from what I believe than you who are saying, I haven't experienced it in the same way. I'm not sure I believe in it. I'm no different. And here I am calling myself a believer. Right? So just let people be. And that's really the essence of it.
Do you see any shifting in society with regards to how widows or widowers are treated? Or do you think there are social shifts that need to happen that you think would help us deal with it more effectively?
So I struggle with this question, and here's why. For a long time, I would not identify with being a widow because I didn't want anyone giving me special treatment. I don't want you adjusting norms. I don't want you doing anything. I'm no different than you. I've just gone through something that changes my story a little bit. And so when we talk about, shifting society or going out of our way to adjust cultural norms, it's like, no, just have a little compassion. Like that'll do. We're the same as any and everybody else. We'll eventually figure it out. There's no need to, sometimes we have conversations in the group and it's like, when we come into crowds or anything where somebody is trying to introduce us, the one phrase that always kind of comes out is, "Oh, this is Kashaun, the one that lost her husband." And it's like, then all of a sudden there's this cloud and now there's a different regard when it as opposed to, well, this is Kashaun. How much different would that conversation be? Mm-hmm. Right. And I think that in a space of being a widow, like that's what we want. Just who are we? Use our name, not our circumstance. And just practice acceptance. That's all.
That last point goes as to the heart of why I felt it was so important to have you on the show, Kashaun. Mm-hmm. The communities that may have taught us how to manage people in this situation might be gone, but the need for guidance and support is still there. And I want to thank you so much for taking the time to be on this show to provide some of that. Kashaun, people are going to be interested in finding out more about you. Where and how can they do so?
Absolutely. Well, I'm active on LinkedIn, Kashaun Parker, MBA, and there's a couple other letters behind my name.
Congratulations.
But I'm also, my company, Next Step Forward, is also active on Facebook. So you can find my Facebook page, and it's a community. It's a growing community. You don't have to be widowed or widower to join. I welcome anyone, but it's just a great space to kind of get a sense of, I say the widow's brain, right? Because I come out and I share real stories. I share some of the more personal, in-depth stories, and then I also share some of the stories of healing and teaching and moving forward. So it's a good way to just kind of get involved and understand. And then I could also be reached by email at KashaunParker@gmail.com if maybe you have a particular question or something that comes up and you'd like to reach me. That's the best way to do it.
Thank you.
Absolutely.
Kashaun, it's been great taking a ride with you today. Thank you for joining us. And for everyone tuning, it was wonderful. Thank you. And everyone tuning in, if you like this episode, be sure to subscribe and leave a review on Apple or a comment on YouTube. And I'll see you next time for another ride down the Purpose Highway.
When you're racing down the Purpose Highway, we want to make sure you're healthy and happy every step of the way. That's why we're proud to partner with It's NOLA, 21st century plant-based healthy granola snack bites made with real ingredients and audacious flavor. It's NOLA crafts small batch hand-rolled granola balls that are vegan, gluten-free, and naturally low in sugar. It's NOLA's delightful bites come in 3 flavors: luscious cranberry coconut, sassy mango masala, and dark, decadent, chewy chocolate. It's NOLA is available to both individual customers and for wholesale accounts at itsnola.com. That's ITSNOLA.com. Guests on this show are already enjoying this delicious snack. Check out It's NOLA's website for yourself and find out how good it is.